It can be anybody. It is not necessarily a parent looking after your grandparent. It's not necessarily a parent looking after their 5-year-old kid.
More than 2.6 million Australians currently provide care for someone they love. That's about 2.2 billion hours of unpaid care each year. If these carers were paid, it'd cost nearly $1.5 billion every single week.
From the outside, you wouldn't know what we're going through. We look like two fairly functioning adults in society.
At the age of 19, Jessie was diagnosed with leukemia. She's been undergoing a course of chemo every 6 weeks for the past 8 years.
My post-traumatic stress disorder, severe depression and anxiety was diagnosed in 2016. It does break you down.
Her partner Willie is also her carer.
It's just making cups of tea when she needs it, being a shoulder to lean on, helping around, like making dinners, whatever it might be.
Unpaid carers are 2.5 times more likely to feel lonely, battling their own struggles with physical and mental well-being.
I had to realise that it's okay for me to take breaks to look after her more effectively as well, and myself.
The pandemic bringing new challenges.
He would go out and do everything for me. I didn't leave the house. I didn't go outside. It's really hard to be social. We think you need to connect to people to really feel like you belong.
But for now, Jessie and Willie are hopeful for the future.
Some days it's hard, but it's definitely rewarding. It's just, I love it, in a way.
He's just an incredible person. There are few like him in the world. He should be really proud of everything he's done. And there's just no words.
How beautiful.
Jamila Rizvi is an acclaimed author and gender equality activist and has had her own experience of being cared for through illness and joins us now to talk about it. Jamila, thanks very much for your time. So a lot of people would know that you were diagnosed with a rare brain tumour in 2017 and as a result your husband became your full-time carer. How did that affect your relationship?
I think it was a huge shock, and it was a shock that no one really talked us through or prepared us for, because people don't talk about this stuff, right? You think you have that phase of a relationship when you meet and you fall in love and you date and it's all lovely, and then you have that period where you've got little kids, and then you think about that warm, fluffy slipper love that comes with your 80s and 90s. And we got there when I was 31. So we just fast forwarded through a lot of what should have been a romantic, loving life together, because Jez was in charge of some really fundamental parts of keeping me alive.
Well, in sickness and in health is often just this throwaway line, you know, when you do your vows. And you're right, no one actually thinks about what does that mean? What commitment am I making to you in sickness and in health?
Yeah, that's so true. And you know what? Jeremy and I wrote our own vows when we got married, and we cut that bit out.
So does that mean he was off the hook?
Yeah, he totally could have failed. I'm very impressed he stayed anyway.
Well, obviously, the role of the carer can be a very taxing one, mentally, emotionally, physically. And then on top of that, you've got a pandemic as well. How do you feel like the pandemic would have affected the millions of carers that are across Australia?
Yeah, I've been doing some work with Carers Australia, including on a podcast called The Secret Life of Carers. And from talking to a lot of those people, I've seen just how acutely it affected not just the people they cared for, but them. Because when your primary responsibility is looking after someone who is already vulnerable, a pandemic comes along and you are on edge all the time. You are always alert for danger. You have fears about what happens if they get sick, what happens to access. I had a few weeks ago a medication that didn't come in for 3 weeks. Now, I was fortunate that just made me a little bit ill, but what if it had been one that I rely on to be alive? So I think there's all of those fears that become more acute. And then there's also the isolation and the loneliness, which I think is even tougher for carers.
Carers come in all shapes and sizes, you know, husbands, as you mentioned, children sometimes, caring for a parent. Are there other supports that you think would make that job easier for carers? What's needed, do you think?
There has been a real lack of investment in the community services, and I think it's led to this crisis of inadequate funding. There's an insufficient workforce for those who are paid carers, and there's not a whole lot of research and development in this space. The sector as a whole needs comprehensive and well-informed reform to better meet the needs of carers.
Well, as long as everything else that you've been doing at the moment, you've put out a new book, which is crazy, Work, Love, Body, which looks at the future of women post-pandemic. We know that women have been disproportionately hit by the pandemic. Is the future bright?
No.
I guess you wouldn't have needed to write a book about it if it was all ticked off and good.
It could have been more of a post-it, I think, if the future was right. But no, it did need a book. Look, women have been affected adversely by the pandemic, and in a different way to men. We know that our frontline workforce is feminised. They are mostly undervalued and overworked. They need to get paid better, and they need better hours, and they need to be safe at work. And of course, women's unpaid care and domestic labour has intensified. Men are doing a little bit more than before, and women doing a lot more than before. So frontline workers with caring responsibilities, school closures, all of this has really significantly impacted the caring crunch. Women are the ones doing it really tough.
Jamila, you obviously come from a family of carers because we spoke to your dad early on in this Risby edition of the project. Is there a chance that another podcast could be launched off tonight, a father and daughter, a podcast or a keeping up with the Risbys?
Pete, look, I'm really worried about women's jobs, and my dad's already trying to take mine.
Jamila's book, Work, Love, Body, is out now. There it is. Jamila, thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Thanks for having me.
With so much content online, it's sometimes hard to keep up with it all. And let's face it, who has the time? The Project YouTube has you covered with the stories that matter. Hit subscribe for a daily list of the news that you need to know.